Hello. This is Joe, and we're back because it's Monday, and I've got an incredible friend on the Inside Out podcast. You and I have had some amazing conversations in the past. How many years now?
Oh, 8? I don't know.
It's been a while.
I don't know.
It's been a while.
I didn't know you were going to put me on the spot.
I'm
like
sorry.
that.
I don't know. I don't even know. I'm not supposed to know timelines.
8 of the best years of my life. That's for
incredible
sure.
years. I know. Ever since I showed up in your life, everything's just gone.
Exactly.
Up and up. But we've always said it'd be amazing to have a discussion centered around life, faith, business, and also just a little bit about some of the great insights that you have centered around actually life and business. And you've been incredibly helpful. You've been like probably the best coach I've ever had that I'd never had to pay.
Awesome.
So this is the cool part of it. I call you just pretending to be a friend.
Yes.
Really, I'm just trying to get some advice.
It goes both ways. That's what's good about it. I love that.
Yeah. And it's funny because you and I met at church, and I always remember because we were going through this transition, and you came in to kind of facilitate the transition. And I remember the order I had at the time was that because I was the community pastor,
yes.
and I was advised that you were going to come and you were going to oversee the transition. So I was supposed to submit to you, and I thought,
wow.
Oh crap! I gotta submit to another white guy. And so it's like,
oh, wow.
But that's how we met, and I just connecting with you. I just saw, wow, you're so brilliant, and I think life has been just really cool, just because you helped me transition out, which is really fascinating. Your advice was just like gold in that period of time.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and I've always felt that you have had a gift for just perceiving what other people, which is just very underrepresented, I feel like, in leadership in the world, where you bump into people, no one really sees what's on your mind, what's actually going on. So the world needs people that can actually see the true self of someone else,
wow.
Which is something that you just have.
You know what? This is interesting because I didn't expect to have this conversation about me, but there we go. So again, you see, I'm getting some free coaching now. It's live,
Love it.
though. But for the longest time, I actually was challenged by it because I never saw it as a tangible. And I know you
right.
and I had this conversation forever. Like, what's a transformational consultant? Like, what the heck? People want something, tangible and practical.
Yes.
And you're probably one of the few people that helped me see that.
Most people don't have someone in their life that is like that. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have surface conversations, but someone that you can actually talk about what's going on, that actually sees you, what you're going through, can relate. That's just very rare, I think. People have their own lives, they're busy, stuff going on, but also just I think a lot of people don't see. I don't know what it is, but people in leadership often, they're in these roles, they're trying to move a business forward or move an organization forward, but they don't really see what's going on with any of the people around them, which is, I think, a huge weakness.
And why do you think that happens? Because I know you've led an incredibly successful company, which you've exited, I think, a year ago now.
It was 2 years ago.
2 years.
Yeah,
oh my goodness!
Yeah,
it's
2
been
years
2
ago.
years.
Yeah.
So and you built this. You tell the story because you tell it better. But you started how many years ago? 10.
Started 15.
15 years.
Yes.
Okay. See, I should stop right now.
Yeah. Now I'm sounding very old. 15 might have even been 16. It was a while ago.
It's a while ago. So you've written a book about this whole concept, empower then lead. And that the whole idea developed through your leadership and running.
Yeah, through the journey.
So at the outset, I remember you told me that was something you didn't really naturally do. You didn't really see the people first.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people just get caught up in the business. They get caught up in whatever their skill is or whatever the objective is. Okay, I need to grow this business. I need to make the impact that way and make more money, whatever it might be. That becomes the focus. And I said this in my book, where people become almost a means to an end, which is a really sad thing.
Wow.
And I'm sure anyone listening can relate to some leader in their life or someone in their life where they feel that way, that they're just sort of part of a machine, or they're just providing something for someone, but they don't really matter. And it took me a while to get to the point of realizing that you can have a lot more success in company life even, and make more money even, if that's what your focus is, if you actually legitimately care about people first, and you see people, and you see your team, you see what maybe they're struggling with, you see where they might need some help, you see that whatever it might be, now they're giving their best. Maybe you see how their role might need to shuffle a little to something that really maximizes their strengths. If that's your role, then I think now you're going to see real impact. But a lot of people, it's very short-sighted, because it's all about, I need whatever impact I can make. So today I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to talk to this client, send this email. So it's all about me. So people kind of help out in a delegation kind of way, and not in a way that I'm actually helping them be empowered to do some really great work.
That is counterintuitive, because in culture today, especially in a society where, every quarter you have to have some type of, growth and profit. Most companies tend to not see the person. They see the individual for what they can accomplish within the context of the role that they have. And if they are not accomplishing it, then...
For sure. And there's going to be a tension between those two things, and that's okay. I'm not saying
no.
It's just all about the people. Don't worry about the business at all.
Yeah.
There's going to be a balance of those things, but if you leave off the human element and leave off caring about the team and helping them thrive, then I think you're missing out on the other side. Well, both sides.
So would you say the purpose of a CEO or leader in a company is specifically to empower his people?
Yeah, I'd say, if you're thinking about doing anything that's greater than yourself, then yes. Some people, they actually just want to run a one-man show, or it's all about this one person. Maybe there's a couple people supporting. That's fine. But if you want to build something that's bigger than yourself, then it's going to have to be about others. Your focus, your time has to be about others. That's the only way, in my mind, mathematically. If I'm spending all my time on just my own stuff, my team, they're just a means to an end. They're just doing little tasks here and there. There's a cap on the potential there. But that, I think, gets released when I'm seeing every single person on my team, that how can I get the best out of that person, the best of that person? And then they're doing the same thing for now you can see how you can scale and grow something.
It's got a cascading effect.
For sure.
Then they're also trying to empower others.
Exactly.
So explain, because I know we just kind of delved right into the book.
Yes.
But maybe explain a little bit about the inspiration for the book, why you wrote the book, and then what your hope is from the book. And then we can kind of discuss the concepts, because that's really powerful.
Yeah. The inspiration for the book was, I think, the first many years of starting my own business. I was just working in the business. I was working long hours. I was not really trying to help others be set up for success. And it came to a point where the trigger for me, the problem that I had that forced me to change, or forced me to see a new perspective, which is often necessary for people that need this big crisis. In my case, not that there's a big crisis, but I wanted to grow the business, and I felt that I was the cap. Because if you think about how many decisions you make in a day, if everything's going through you, that was the cap. So I wanted to grow the business and realize that I'm going to have to figure out how to get better results from people, in a sense. That was my mindset at the time. And it started me on this journey of, it just kind of clicked for me that I need to almost do no work myself and just focus on the team.
Wow.
Just try that for a while. I kind of just chose this extreme way, just try that, and incredible results. The team grew, and I think people were a lot more happy to come to work, to contribute their best. So for me, it was such a drastic turnaround in my thought process and the way I was leading, that I just wanted to write about it, tell other people about it. So that's as simple as it was for me.
Wow. That's crazy, because I'm in the, at the beginning stages, in the sense of, business starting to grow and starting to add team members into it.
Yes.
So you and I had, a great conversation offline about this.
Yes.
And you were helping me, process that. And maybe this would be a really good conversation, in the sense of, like, when you first started, what were the mindset shifts that you had to make to go from the one-man show, where it was just you going out there, you did sales, you did, you did the programming, you pretty well oversaw every part of the business.
I was in the middle of decisions across the company, every part of it.
So You said that you decided to, completely remove yourself from what did that look like, and what were some of the challenges that you went through?
What it looked like was looking at all the people around me and thinking, what do they need to make the same or better decisions than me? So, and it's going to be different for each person, but for the different people around me, what does it look like for them to be set up for success? So, some leaders will get frustrated with their team because, they made that bad decision, and end up micromanaging at that point, or making all the decisions for them and just getting them to do little piecemeal tasks here and there. But it was switching the mindset to, I almost wanted a formula for how can better decisions result from people, in a sense. So thinking about, what does that look like for someone else to make a better sales call than me? Or what does it look like for someone to run a better meeting with a client than me? What are they missing? On the client end, for example, we can zoom into that. I was the one that had traveled to different clients, spent time with clients. So I knew what it was like. I knew what clients cared about. I knew what their offices looked like. Meanwhile, my team did not. So it stands to reason I would understand the clients more and make better client decisions. So what it looked like there is, let's get some people traveling. Let's get them visiting clients, going into their office. That's what that looks like. So you can see how, if you're focusing on someone, what they might be lacking to make good decisions, now you'll realize that you were set up to succeed, and you always would make the best decisions given the setup of the scenario, until you shift that a little bit and concentrate on, okay, how can this person be better set up? That's what needs to happen. But as for mindset, you need to be okay with other people succeeding, which I think is a big stumbling point for people. The insecurity of, what if they outshine me? What if they look better than me? If you can't get past that, or if you can't see yourself as potentially being the problem, that maybe bad decisions resulted in the past from others because of something I did. If you cannot consider that, then I'd say, don't even bother trying.
Wow.
Don't even bother trying.
Because I would never have thought that, because I guess my natural tendency to think is that most people don't want to delegate or, give up some of the work that they're doing because they're afraid that the ball's going to get dropped.
Yeah.
And so naturally there's this attachment to that you grow. Like, I know for me, for example, it's like, I know all the pieces of the business, what needs to be done.
Yes.
And so, and some of it's even at a subconscious level now, where I'm not even thinking about it, because I'm involved in every part of it. And the challenge that I find actually is the ability to communicate what I know.
Yes.
So most of the times, even recently, like I was just having a conversation with the program director specifically about that, where I felt like I didn't communicate well in a bunch of stuff. And that's the challenge that I find. It's like, well, people always talk about delegating and giving responsibility, but there's an art to that. There's a skill set to that.
Totally. Yeah, you need to think about, how could you package that up in such a way that someone fully gets it and understands it. It's not just a PowerPoint presentation with 3 facts in it. That's often what people think about with training. Yeah. But that's why I'm saying, send them to a client site. What does that look like in your scenario? People just need to understand. That's what matters. The knowledge. I mean, you're gonna have knowledge as well, but you need to understand it. Can you recite it back to me? Can you do you actually understand it?
So it's clarity, and you often in your book talk about context. Context matters.
Yes.
And so when you delegate, you really have to set the context for the individual. Otherwise, you're setting them up for the fall.
Yes, exactly. But sharing context with someone takes a lot of time, which is why people often just fall short on that. And instead of painting the full picture for you, I'm just going to say, go here and do that. That's just faster. It's faster at that moment, but you're going to be having those moments every day for the rest of your life, right?
Yes.
So, but you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking, in that moment, it's faster just to say, do this. However, if you want to set someone up to succeed so that you're out of the picture, now you're just supporting them, they have to understand the context. They have to understand what they're doing. Now you're less in the picture. So you just have to think, well, what do you need to share with someone so that they can get it, actually understand it?
To do that, you have to do a lot of thinking, which requires you to actually somehow remove yourself from the day-to-day activity. How did you do that? How did you manage that?
Yeah, you mean to have enough time?
Yeah, to have enough
to
focus on that, to prepare for that, because it takes time to take whatever knowledge and information that you have, put it on paper, and also sometimes it's like, I know parts and pieces of the business where I just kind of learned it. It's not like I had, processes and systems and policies and stuff that I've written down. In order to then impart it to someone else, it does require you to kind of, I guess, change your schedule and the way you manage your life.
But what about just having someone join your calls, or having someone shadow you for the day?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are unwilling to do that because I'm the CEO or I'm the leader, I'm dealing with private matters, whatever.
Yeah.
But invite someone into your world with whatever you're trying to help them understand. And now, maybe they're on a client call where the client's getting upset about something, and seeing how you handle it, how you approach it. You have the call, and then you take 5 minutes after the call to ask the person that's shadowing, how did that go? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And they need to be able to ask you why anytime. Anytime. So why did you come back and say that? Or why did you approach it this way? You always need to answer those questions.
So this is interesting, because what you're saying to me is that growth requires you to be really vulnerable, in the sense that you now have to let people into, and I think that's where most people fail, is that this is your baby.
Yes.
You own it, and so now all of a sudden to have someone else coming into that environment, it's
you're not willing to be transparent. You're not willing to be vulnerable. So again, that's going to stop someone else from making good decisions, because that's in your head. So of course, if all that's in your head, what's going to result? I mean, great decisions for you, not so great from them. That's the problem.
Wow. So really, some businesses are actually not even ready to grow or ready to bring others people on board because they're unwilling to.
No, and that's why very often you'll see businesses resort to process guides, standard operating procedures, because it's really about just do these steps and that's your job. And that's more okay if you have the type of business that's not complex or creative. But a lot of businesses these days have either a degree of complexity or degree of creativity, where you want people to think for themselves and make good decisions. If that's part of your business, then you can't just put that in a step-by-step guide, because now what if the client says this? What if this scenario comes about? So many different variations can happen. So unless I understand the full picture and I can navigate in that situation, the standard operating procedure is not really going to help me, unfortunately.
That's really fascinating. What about, I'm just thinking at the top of my head, because, for example, I work in an environment where everything that we do is online. And so often I'm talking to people in other countries, and they're trying to learn processes and systems that, I've been functioning under, and they're maybe in India, or maybe they're in the US, they're in different parts of the world. So speak to me a little bit about culture, how, like, in order to be able to impart again, because we're talking about delegating and giving somebody. One of the challenges that I'm confronted with is that very thing, is that you can give somebody, the steps and the systems, but you notice that they don't get done, and you get frustrated. And it's happened to me where I'm like, why isn't this getting done? Like, it's there in black and white. Why can't you just follow that? But for some reason, it hasn't worked out in the way that I expected it. One of the challenges that I realized was the cultural component of it, which I never even thought about at the beginning. I just thought, this is easy, but culturally, in a different part of the world, somebody thinks differently.
Yes. So are you saying that the person wasn't following your instructions, even though it was pretty simple?
Yeah, I thought
there was no variation to what was happening?
There wasn't variation to some extent. Like, it seemed to me black and white. But in talking about it, I realized that, no, I wasn't really sharing it's the intangibles. It's those parts that they're cultural. Like, they're just cultural. Like,
can you give me an example?
Yeah, for example, so the role of this person is a setter. So their job is to set up so somebody's interested, so it's part of a sales process.
Yes.
So they reach out, and so they're kind of the person that does a little bit of the conversation to make sure that this person is a fit before we move them into.
And are they copying, pasting messages, or are they
Yes.
sometimes typing their own?
Most of it is if this then, if this then, so forth, so on. But what I realized is that wasn't working, because not everybody asks the same exact questions.
Sure.
So it required a little bit of creativity.
Yes.
And I realized.
So that's it. It requires creativity, which means the instructions will fall short in many scenarios. So you could say, as long as, in the instructions, you could say, as long as this is the exact path, or these are the exact 5 paths, go ahead and here's exactly what you do. If it falls outside of that, now you have to decide, are you going to provide all the context and set them up to make those type of decisions, or are you going to limit their role just to those 5 paths?
Interesting.
But you have to make that decision. And probably in your mind, you'll associate all those things together. And even though they're really succeeding at the 5 paths, the 6th random creative one, they're not succeeding at. So in your mind, you're thinking, oh, they're just failing sometimes. I don't really understand it. But it's those other scenarios that they just don't have the context for. So you just have to decide based on their role, based on the type of, do you want a long-term relationship with them? Is this just a short-term thing? You have to answer those questions, because if you're going to invest in them, in context, in trying to communicate everything on your mind while you make certain decisions, now you're going to have to spend some time, because maybe you start to let them shadow you for a few minutes a day while you're sending some replies, and you talk through it. Okay, so here's this scenario. Here's why I'm doing this. So maybe do that for a few days, and then a few days after that, you shadow them while they're doing the same thing, and let them talk through it. And you can stop them before they send it. At that point, maybe they send something you think, the tone is all wrong there. So let's talk about that. Let me tell you why I would approach it differently. You can see how that takes time.
Yes, it takes
going through that
tremendous amount of
process.
time.
So if this is going to be a longer term thing, that's when it makes sense. But if this is just a short term, I need someone being a setter for the next 2 months for these 5 scenarios, and that's enough help for me, then I just believe in carving it out. So you're being deliberate about it. Like, this is what I want. This person, it's just going to be a part-time, short-term relationship. But if this is, when I talk about employees, long-term relationship, for me, it's all about investing in them. There's a difference between those two things.
Now, let's talk a little bit about investing, because that's often a very challenging thing for leaders to do.
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about investing in your team and making them a priority. What did that look for you practically, in the sense of you divesting yourself from whatever roles that you used to hold, and then
it basically meant I took every role that I was doing. So let's just say client calls.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, who's the person for that? Okay, this is the person for that. Now, what are they lacking in those areas? Okay, they need some training. They need to shadow me for a while. We need to talk through a few things.
Yeah.
We go through that process. Now, I'm going to still participate in client calls, but I'm going to stop talking. It's just going to be a little bit difficult, and let them have a shot at it. Maybe they get only a certain part of the call initially for just to see how it goes, but I still carry the call. My point is now we're phasing them in, and we're having we're giving real-time feedback as it's going, which is one, I think, big element of investing in someone, but often gets overlooked, the need for real-time feedback. Because now you're not talking about 5 predefined paths for someone to go on. There's a lot of variation based on all this context. I'm going to make decisions, the way different people make decisions. Now you have to just have this real-time feedback scenario where let's talk about this decision. What was your mindset here, and vice versa, where your team can come to you, talk about this. Well, why this?
Yeah.
That environment has to be there if you're not all about following steps.
Wow.
I think that's part of investing.
Yeah, that's and it's because I was thinking about this recently. If you're a growing business and you've got tons of cash flow and things are great, then it's easier in the sense of even investing into your team.
Yes.
Because you've got a growing enterprise. What if
honestly, most growing don't even see it that way.
No?
But I agree with you.
Yeah.
I that sounds right.
Yeah.
If you have growing business, lots of cash flow, now it's a no-brainer. Let's invest more in people.
Yeah.
But I don't see it translate that way.
No?
I think I totally agree with you that it should, but again, now you're just focused on let's keep increasing the profit. So no matter what, you have to make the conscious decision. I'm actually going to commit to this, whether you have lots of profit or don't have profit. I think either way.
So you're speaking about a value, because I think often people will say, well, when I reach this number, then I'm going to invest more into people. But what you're saying is that from the outset, that's got to be your mindset. Otherwise, it's just not going to be something that you're going to implement.
Yeah. So at what point you're just all of a sudden going to start, once you reach 5 people or 10 people, you're going to stop being a micromanager and start actually trying to set people up for success. I think it's just got to be in your DNA that I'm thinking, how can I invest in the people around me?
So when you wrote your book, philosophically, you're hoping that, most of the people that you work with obviously are existing businesses. You mostly work with businesses that are, successful, growing, and maybe the CEO's stuck.
Yes.
And you're trying to kind of help them get unstuck.
Totally.
And so is that because you've applied your book, and so, like, for me originally it didn't apply because I was like, what, I'm just self-employed guy trying to I'm just trying to feed my family here, buddy. Like, so when you and I had the conversation, though, I was able to take the philosophy and the system, implement it towards my kids.
Yes.
So maybe what we need to do is first describe what the process is.
Sure.
And then talk about how that can be applied in different areas of your life.
Yeah, I think it honestly most applies as a parent, even more than as a CEO.
Interesting.
But I fail a lot at that part of it. Personally, I find that it just sticking to it very difficult sometimes. But so with kids, first of all, from a mindset perspective, I often wish the mindset you have with your kids, that's just, if you could take a small percentage of that mindset and apply it in a company scenario, you'd be very successful in a company. Because with your kids, you're always just inherently thinking, I want to make you successful. Yeah. I want to help build you up. I want to invest in you. That's a lot more natural than in a company scenario, obviously. And even if the kids fail at something, you're not inclined to think, oh, they're just always a failure forever. You're thinking, oh, I could probably help them. They can get past this. You're more optimistic about your kids. So that mindset is, I think, just what's the foundation for this. Mm-hmm. But then in executing with your kids, so I'm trying to think of a quick example.
No, let's use the example that you and I talked about. Your
kids, the coats or the sink?
The coats.
Yes.
That would be a great one.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So and it's so simple, but it just helps you understand. Yeah. I think there are 3 sort of elements of empowerment, or 3 ingredients that need to be in place for someone to make good decisions. So for a kid, let's just apply it for the coats.
Yeah.
So the problem is we want the kids to put away their coats and put away their shoes when they come inside. It's a simple problem. You and I are probably the only ones that have had that problem. Yes. Everyone else is probably good. No. But so you see that problem. Number one, you think, do they have the skills or the ability to execute that task? So it's to actually put their stuff away. Number one, if the kids are younger, maybe they can't reach the hanger. So they might need a stepping stool in place. Can they understand cognitively instructions? Can they understand that this is a responsibility that we're going to be giving them? So do they have the ability to do that? So that's number one. Number two, and we talked about it already, is context. Can you help them understand why this matters? Can you help them understand, here's the organizational system of your closet. I don't know what yours looks like, but maybe the boots go over here, maybe the coats go in here, maybe if it's spring, whatever. That's the context. And why does this matter, putting this away? Well, as a family, we try and have a clean house. If there's too much clutter here, whatever. What I'm saying is explain why. The kids need to know why this matters. And that's something you'll probably have to keep bringing up. And then number 3 is authority, which is, so ability, context, and authority. Do they have the authority to make the decisions and own this job? So this is really the ownership part, mm-hmm. that now you're giving them ownership, responsibility, that this is now your responsibility. You own putting your coat and your shoes away. So those 3 ingredients have to be in place. And always think about, so everything with your kids, always think about, are those things in place? Are they being empowered? So what parents often resort to is, you run in the house and, hey, put that away, put your boots away. We're switching from empowerment to control at that point, which is a natural parent shift that happens. I think it's more the default, frankly. That's what happens. When a kid's walking towards the street, you yell, "Come back this way," instead of sharing context, which is, there's a car coming. Instead of saying there's a car coming, you say, "Come back here." So the child doesn't understand why they're coming back. It's just a shift to shift towards context, context first.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the kid example. Always trying to give your kids more responsibility that's based on them having the ability and context. So what'll very often happen is parents, including myself, will not match the level of responsibility to a kid's ability. So just recently we decided, okay, our kids are old enough they can empty the dishwasher now. I was doing that before. My wife's doing that. Our kids are old enough for that. They had the ability. They just needed a little bit of context for here's where a couple things go. Again, they needed a stepping stool for certain parts of it. But now we're giving them that responsibility. And now it's been 2 weeks, and every day there's a different person that empties the dishwasher. I haven't done it in 2 weeks. That's phenomenal. But that's just handing over responsibility, letting them know they own it. I gave them some feedback recently about something because whatever. But that's the difference between control and empowerment, that you're setting someone up to own something, you're explaining it, and now it's their responsibility. So that's just at a small level, some of the principles that would be applied across the company. So if it's a salesperson, do they have the ability? Are they friendly? Are they strong with clients? Are they good at communication? So, okay, they have the ability. So now context, do they understand the market? Do they understand the products that we're selling? There's tons of context there that they need to understand. And then authority, do you own sales? Am I stepping on your toes, or do you actually have responsibility for it? So that you could see how those three ingredients apply.
Yeah, it's funny because when I'd read the book, and then I noticed in the way that I was parenting, because at the time I think the problem was the coats being, it's winter,
Yes.
in Canada, just like
they're just everywhere all the time.
And it's just a big pet peeves of mine, walking in and having to run into all this stuff. And so the frustration was like, yeah, can't you just hang your coat? It was my wife actually that was just like, well, they can't reach.
It's pretty simple.
It's pretty simple. And so now they've got hangers that eye level, and it's just like, it's some of it seems so utterly like, logical and easy to do, but it isn't, because often I think as parents, we do the default position of every parent is control, because it's
just commands.
It's commands because it's much more short term.
Yes, short term.
It's much more efficient, but you're constantly barking orders for the rest of your life. And I think most CEOs or company leaders or pastors, whoever they may be, that tends to be their...
Yeah, it's the same thing. That's just the default.
The default position of control. And control in the short term, what you're saying is that...
Very effective in the short term.
Very effective. But ultimately, it doesn't provide context, nor does it really give people authority where they can own it. And
Correct.
So therefore, the person, first of all, doesn't grow.
Yes.
They're stunted.
Yes.
So I think most children these days, the reason they don't really grow in responsibility, because we often hear this, people are always yelling, going, oh, my kids are irresponsible, they don't want to do anything, so forth, so on, because parents have been barking orders and the kids are like, the heck with you.
Totally.
But providing context and also providing, having the ability to know whether or not that individual has the skill set, that's all on you, the leader.
Correct.
That's a lot of work
Correct.
on that. That's why I think, I asked you those questions because I'm dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, in the sense that I have to actually have the bandwidth in my life in order to set them up for success.
Yes.
That's a lot of work.
Yes. And if you don't have the bandwidth, you're going to resort to control because it's about the short term.
Exactly.
So immediately, I need this done immediately. I'm busy. I have all these things going on. Do this thing. That's just what happens. So you need space for others, to concentrate on others.
It's so crazy because I've learned so much from a parenting standpoint in regards to, and then applying it in business. Because one of my, and this is stuff that you catch in the moment when you're barking an order and stuff like that.
Yes.
So, for example, let's say we have to be somewhere and we have to be at a certain time. For example, church used to be like that.
Yes.
You know, we have to be at a certain point.
Yes.
And so what you're doing is, and my wife taught me this, is that kids are not like adults. They don't wake up thinking about what they have to do. They wake up thinking about play and fun.
Correct.
And all that
They may
stuff.
not even know what day it is.
They
don't even know it's Sunday.
No, most of the time they're just, they're waking up, and you're waking up, you have a very specific agenda. And so one of the things I used to do is a lot of yelling, trying to rush them out of the house.
For sure.
And my wife, having been an educator, she understands the rhythm of kids. And she's like, well, kids can't just flip on a dime.
For sure.
And I think we need to apply that too in the context of work environment, where sometimes you need things done immediately.
Correct.
And you're walking in there and you're barking orders, and often people are just like.
But again, you're talking about advance notice for kids, for what you're just talking about now. That's context. So that's a leader, that's a parent failing to provide context. So on the Sunday morning or the Saturday night, you could say, kids, tomorrow's church, we have to leave at X time. That's context that most parents, what normally happens is the kids are playing, and then 5 minutes before you leave, it's, okay, go brush your teeth. The kids are like, I don't even know what we're doing. And that the feeling of being controlled is not a good feeling either. Mm-hmm. So now even the resistance, I think, gets larger from the kids, because which happens to adults too, where you're like, don't tell me what to do. There's just that feeling like, what do you mean brushing my teeth? What am I doing? Versus all that morning. Okay, so you could give them responsibility for brushing whatever needs to be done, and just let them know that by 9:30 or whatever the time is, we're hoping to leave around this time. If they have all that context, it's just a much more smooth. I'm not going to say it's perfect with kids.
No, of course not.
But that makes it so much better than the feeling of being controlled. And the same things with your staff. If you're walking in and saying, I need this report right now. Again, that's tying into the urgency, the busyness that is just not a healthy thing. To be able to give notice and say, unless you just found out you needed it that second from a client, that's rarely the case. Oftentimes you're just in such a reactive state, and then your staff assumes that feeling, and now they're being controlled. It's just not a good path to be heading down.
And it's so funny because it's all we tend to fall into that state. And I was thinking about this even culturally right now with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Most people feel controlled because the leaders haven't really done a great job in setting context.
For sure. And a huge problem is the context is it's blurry, and there's also so many different sides out there that the information people are consuming, you've got this side, the context isn't reliable. It feels that way. So to a lot of different people, you're right, people aren't clearly communicating context, but then a lot of it's fuzzy, that's assuming the balance of what should be clear, and now there's a feeling of control because you don't have that context in place to feel like I understand what's going on. I feel like I'm making these decisions for these reasons. If you don't feel that way, then it's a very different feeling being asked to do this or that or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and it's more in the context of legislating. And I always thought about legislating morality, for example. And I think culturally, people often resort to, the law, establishing a set of laws and saying to people, well, you know what? We don't care whether you like it or not.
Right.
If you don't do A, B, and C, like in the context of the pandemic, it's like you're going to be fined $10,000 or whatever it is. But it's never really a deterrent because people continue. I was just watching something on YouTube recently in Wasaga Beach, and there's like tons of people with their cars, and they're just driving around having a big old party.
Yes.
And of course, they're like, well, the police showed up, and they're trying to, but really, you don't have the heart of the people.
For sure.
The people don't really understand why they're doing, otherwise they wouldn't be out there.
Right.
And so let me put you on the hot seat because I think this would be a fun.
That often, before you say that,
that
often comes down. Government will do that because if you remember the formula, ability, context, authority.
Yeah.
That'll come down because I think oftentimes the government will not believe in the ability of people to even handle the context.
Wow.
So, and to a certain degree, they're right. To a certain degree.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of people that can understand the context, can think through it, and probably give some good ideas in the mix. But government ends up treating people almost the lowest common denominator in a sense of, oh, okay, people, we don't believe in their ability to cognitively make the right decisions. So I'm not saying anyone's thinking through all this, but it's effectively what happens. So you over legislate and you over control, just like companies add too many operating procedures and processes. You end up overdoing that because you don't trust in people's ability to understand and then make the right decisions. So I'm going to make the decision for you.
Yeah.
That's just what happens.
So when you take control, in some ways, it's a loss of confidence.
Yes.
But this is where your concept is a bit scary for a leader, because what you're saying is that even if, in the context of a company or at home as a parent or as a society, government, whatever it might be, that at some point when people are delegated authority, they're going to fail. They're going to drop the ball because we're human by nature. And what you're suggesting, and I don't know, you tell me if I'm incorrect here, is that that's at the time when you actually give even more context, more education, rather than just taking control over. So what I'm trying to ask, I guess, is at what point, like how long should you wait before you actually take control? Or is control a sign that you've lost some sense of I guess you're no longer, how am I going to phrase this? This is really challenging. I'm trying to, what I'm saying?
I know what you're getting at.
At what point, so just the point is this, at what point do you take control? At what point did you look at your kids and say, okay, you know what? Because I do this at home, okay? And my wife yells at me all the time. So I'm watching and they're sweeping. So that's part of their, they have a responsibility after dinner or stuff like that. But I find it's taking too long.
That's unacceptable.
Just unacceptable. So
what else do they have to do though? They're sweeping. Let them take an hour.
And they're not doing it the right way.
Oh, okay.
They're just there's breadcrumbs over here, and
I see. So there's still dirt at the end of the day.
It's just not being done perfectly.
I see.
And so what I do is,
are you tripping over the dirt? Like, how significant is their
It's significant enough that it becomes a big, massive boulder in my mind. Okay, it's this massive thing, and
just trying to understand.
It agitates me for some reason. Okay, it's my thing. So what I'll do is I'll just take their job over.
Yes.
And my wife's like, "How are they going to learn if you keep doing it for them?"
Yes.
And I'm like, "Well, it's taking too long." And I think government, to some extent, are thinking in that same manner. They're thinking like, you know what? It's much easier to just get the police out there than try to, educate and get the stuff, because it's a long-term game when you're trying to educate somebody.
Yes.
And so I guess the question I'm asking you is, at what point do you, take control?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's important to note that when your kids were babies, when they're first born, you were controlling everything.
Yes, I was.
And that was okay.
Yes.
So you have naturally started phasing out the control in certain areas, phasing in empowerment in certain areas, like with the sweeping.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And like I think I said before, I think parents often aren't phasing in enough of that. So they're controlling too long. Oftentimes they'll control actually all through a kid's life, frankly, but
university.
Yeah, exactly. But what you want to do is be phasing that out and seeing areas where people can take on responsibility. Like getting ready on a Sunday, you're not going to be telling your kids forever that they need to brush their teeth before going out the door. At some point, they're going to do it. They're going to have to own that thing. So not all control is bad, is what I'm saying. I think control is okay when there is that lack of ability, as with your baby child, where at that point you are controlling their life.
Yeah.
That's okay. But it's watching for when the ability is present, trying to phase in how can they own and how can they have more autonomy in their life. So it's heading that direction. Now with the sweeping, that's a little complicated, but I'd say their ability seems to be what's lacking there.
Very true.
Where they're not thorough enough. So that's ability, that's a skill. They're not thorough, or even just using the broom, maybe it's a little tricky for them depending on their age.
True.
So that's in the mix. But if you apply that even to a company scenario, you have to think about the upward trajectory of that ability. In the case of your kids, they're getting older all the time, and I'd say each day will get just slightly better at sweeping.
True.
I love this example, by the way.
Yeah.
So they're on a positive trajectory with their ability. So all that to say, I think it's okay that you're tidying up a little bit, but depending on the day, how much time you have, but certain days, try and invest a little and help them with the ability a little bit, like help train them a little bit. Not always. I do think it's okay if sometimes you're jumping in, but they're on a path to doing it. So that's a great thing. Now, with some employees, okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I was on the phone with a couple leaders last week that were saying a couple employees were often just making bad decisions. So and that's why they don't trust those employees in the future. And that is often the story of leadership, that I just don't trust them. They've messed up before. But you have to unravel that in your mind. You have to, if you could dive into that memory from 10 years ago, whenever they messed up, or a year ago, whenever they messed up, did they have ability, context, and authority? Usually they didn't have the context, but maybe there's a mix in there. But in your mind, you weren't thinking about that time. You just know that they made a bad decision. That's in your head. That's all that matters. Not all that matters, but that's what you've summarized it as. They made a bad decision, and now you're forecasting, saying they will keep making bad decisions. I make better decisions. I don't trust them. That's what happens. But once you deconstruct that memory with this formula, you realize, they didn't fully have the context. It's true. That's why I knew a little bit more about this scenario. So what I would say is, in the future, once you're making sure someone has those three things, if bad decisions are consistently still resulting, so you asked about, this is all tying into your question about control.
Yeah.
You might have to realize that they cannot, I don't want to say cannot be empowered in those areas, but maybe they're not the best person for that area. So you might have someone that's really not a good communicator, that's dealing with sales, and they're making some bad decisions, causing conflict with some clients, whatever it might be. In that scenario, I'd say they've got to be pulled to do something else, because they're probably going to keep making bad decisions unless you're getting training for them and really investing in communication skills and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself how much you're willing to invest in someone in areas like that, but maybe shuffle the position a little bit. I still don't like control, though. I mean, back to your question, I still don't want to do that. I'd rather shuffle positions, and then I'd rather, if it's just not working anywhere, even though I'm setting them up to be successful and I'm really investing in them, I think I'd rather see them try and thrive in a different context, in a different company, a different scenario. I just don't like control.
I love it, because inherently I think we as people don't want to be controlled. I don't want to control anybody, first of all. It's a full-time job.
But some do. This is what's a little complicated. Some people, they have a lot going on in their personal life. There's lots of things happening. And when they show up at work, I've heard this from people, they'll say, maybe just certain days even, just tell me what to do. I'll clock in, do my thing, I'm out. That does happen. You have to be aware of that. Some people want to do that for extended periods of time. That's what I don't like, because I don't want to be the person just telling someone what to do. That's not the type of arrangement I want. For other people, they say that's fine. I want an assistant that just follows my instructions. Fine. But you have to decide what you're looking for. And my point is, some people, no one would say I like to be controlled. That's not what I mean.
I got you. I understand what you're saying.
They just want to kind of turn off their brain because they have other things going on. And let me just do my 4 steps.
Yeah, they don't want to have to think about it.
Correct.
They just want to.
Correct.
Yeah, I got you.
Like, there are areas in my life where I'm that way.
Just tell me what to do. Yeah.
Tell me what to do. I'll do that thing.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't want to understand everything. I don't understand the context. Just.
No. Because part of, I think, your book, it needs to be applied towards individuals that really want a leadership role.
for sure.
I think when you look at, the formula, the
Yes,
concept is
yes.
really ultimately, because it ends with authority.
Yes.
Ultimately, that person has the authority, the ability to own that position,
Yes.
and make decisions
Correct. Without you.
without you. And so in some ways, the formula is a leadership development process.
Yes.
How you take somebody
Yes.
from,
Yes.
here to
Yes.
over here.
Just following instructions to actually making all the decisions, and now I'm suddenly out of the picture with them.
Which is,
Or just supporting them.
yeah.
Supporting them, giving them feedback, being a coach, being present in their life. That's a very different thing. But do you want that? I don't. I probably, when the first book first came out, I probably would say, oh, everyone needs to do this. But now I'm at the point, this aligns with some people, it doesn't align with others.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, they might just not feel that they're ready. They're not ready to share all the context and be transparent about everything that they know, or they just don't trust people around them and they don't want to confront that. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the most healthy thing, but that's just a different approach.
So would you say that this process can be applied in any scenario? Meaning, different industries, different, I guess, for example, church, or I don't know. What else is there?
I think it applies anywhere where decisions are made.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are certain jobs, or there's certain jobs where it's a factory scenario where you don't want any decisions being made by someone. You just want the execution of doing one thing. So yeah, it's not going to work in that scenario.
Yeah.
But this is coming back to if there's complexity or creativity in any way. So church is a perfect example where this is not about having robots that just follow instructions. You want people to actually think for themselves, you want everyone to be empowered in a church scenario or in an organization scenario. People come up with ideas, making decisions. The decision to greeting someone at the door, this is just a really silly example, but greeting someone at the door, saying something encouraging to someone, you're not going to control that exact. Some places probably do try and control that. Say, here's what you say. But then what happens when the person responds and says, oh, I had a really horrible week, this happened. Now it's suddenly not in my guide. That just doesn't work.
No.
That person needs to be empowered.
Yeah. It needs ownership.
Because a decision's being made. If there's a decision, that's when empowerment matters.
That's really powerful. So in order for people to make great decisions, they need to be empowered to make those decisions.
Yeah. With your kids, you're shifting from you making the decisions to them making the decisions. Almost every day you should think about one less decision you can make and one more they can make. That's what's happening, the shift.
That would be really powerful for a lot of parents, because they're probably stressed out to the tilt.
Because parents don't like that either, but they really don't see a way out of it, because they're thinking the kids just keep messing up. They need me all the time. But think about one thing that your kid can be empowered to do today. It could be the smallest little thing. And just pay attention to anytime you're giving commands or instruction. When you're doing those things, pay attention to it and think, oh, could I instead give some context and let someone own something? Just try going there in your head, and little by little make some improvement.
Yeah, that's really good. I was just thinking about certain cultures, like I know indigenous people, they have this thing called the ethic of non-interference, where they're preparing this child to live, in the wild. Like,
Yes.
I mean, they're not. It's a totally different context in that sense.
Yes.
So what they're doing is they're trying to give that child as much responsibility as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So the kid often is, left to his own. Frequently, they're out there getting acquainted with the environment, because it's a very harsh, challenging environment. So if that child is not independent early on, they're not going to survive in that environment.
Yes.
So that they have this thing, they call it the ethic of non-interference, and interesting enough, and they've done research, and it's fascinating, it's counterintuitive, but that these kids, because they've been given so much independence early on, that their attachments towards their family is much more greater than it is in the Western culture. They actually want to stay home. They don't, most of them don't even want to leave home. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, wow, because in our culture, we've got tons of helicopter parents. Everybody's telling kids what to do.
For sure.
And most kids can't wait to leave home.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that most, kids in Western societies they're thinking
to not
about.
Be controlled, to be able to do to make my own decisions.
So it's very counterintuitive in that the more freedom you give somebody, it's almost like the more loyalty you get.
Yes.
And the more connection.
Totally.
Which is, in our culture, though, it's all about control. We
Yes.
live in a culture that really, more than ever now, because there's so much fear.
Yes.
We're so afraid.
Yes.
So we're always controlling our kids. We're trying to control our environment.
For sure.
We're trying to control everything. And yet, the more control we have, the less control we seem to have. We're more out of control. And you sort of see people.
Totally.
It's almost like I don't know if it's a mental illness, but to some extent it is. I was just thinking about that right now, and I was like, man, it's so important that this message of empowered leadership, that the goal of every leader is to empower people.
Yes.
So that they can be more independent, or more interdependent, I guess would be the question.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not good for both parties in that control scenario. If I'm the helicopter parent, that's just the most miserable thing. It's the most miserable thing, trying to make a million decisions a day and tell your kid what to do constantly. And you're right, the kids, they don't want that either. So it seems so obvious to shift, but again, people don't shift because of the short-term versus long-term mindset, really zooming out to think about it, that no, I don't want to be in this scenario forever. This is not healthy for either party. Let's think about doing this a little bit different.
Yeah. Wow. Man, that was pretty deep. I never thought of it in the concept being applied in so many areas of life. And just as we're having this conversation, I'm realizing the importance. And I think ultimately this message is important because I think as a culture, we need this message now more than ever.
Yeah.
If we're going to have people who are going to make really good decisions. And I think now there's a lot of bad decisions that are being made. And so it's essential.
Yeah.
And so,
but even just in everyday life, people will often do what's kind of a controlling type response or a control response rather than try and understand someone else. So I hear people that will yell at someone in public for doing something, or for not even saying anything. Maybe they don't have a mask on, let's just say. And then you find out after the fact the person has a major health condition, they can't breathe well with a mask. My point is, someone without the context is rushing to judgment on someone else, and that's happening in so many areas of life. Where just to even try and be empowered yourself before rushing to make judgment, trying to understand a scenario, trying to understand another person, would just make life a lot better for people.
Well, yeah, and recently my wife had it was very traumatic for her because I think she was heading to a store and she was with the boys, and they're both 9 and 7, and so she was literally like, she wasn't even out. I don't think she wasn't in a store or anything like that, but she left them in a car, and Lord behold, this woman had called the police.
Wow.
And so my wife's confronted this officer, and she's like, as a mom especially, it's this very incredibly traumatic experience. And the police officer quickly was like, yeah, that's just stupid. Why would somebody do that? If they really cared, the first thing they should have done maybe is just stay with the kids, waited until the mom arrived, and said, hey, but in our culture right now, we have this tendency to, and I'm starting to see it right now in this conversation, that it's about control.
Yes.
Because the person is not even bothering to try to understand the context.
For sure.
It's immediately going to authority and
for sure
saying, and it's scary because what that says to me is that we're being conditioned to really not get context first before.
Correct. And even worse than that for me on a broad scale is social media is often a bunch of people without context that have too much authority.
Wow.
So their voice is large, they have a huge following, whatever it might be, but they have minimal context. So they're not sharing from a place of understanding at all. However, now that's the controlling message that's getting out there.
Which causes more division.
Of course.
You're just stoking the flame.
Yeah.
Because
So the person talking doesn't have context. The people reading it aren't trying to see it as context among all the other pieces of information. They're just taking it as almost a command or just taking it for what it is. And now we got lots of problems.
Yeah, and that's hard because I just saw The Social Dilemma, and I was telling a little bit about that. But they talk about how the algorithm is set up so that it only gives you information that you like, because their interest is to keep you
catering
engaged,
to your bias.
to bias. And so you can't get context on an issue if you're just listening to one group of people.
Right. True context is minimally biased. I don't believe in saying something's not biased at all, but minimally biased, because you have to actually understand the scenario. And there's everything has such strong bias right now that I don't even call it context. It's unless you see it exactly for what it is, that, this person's going to talk with this really strong slant on this end, and maybe you're trying to balance it out, but people generally don't do that.
Yeah, it's really hard. And it's the leadership that's scary, because these leaders are also just consuming information from one source.
Yes.
And so often...
And they're putting their own bias out there as opposed to trying to share true context with people. They have an agenda, and so it's very tricky. We're just getting this diluted context world that, great decisions are not resulting because of it missing.
So maybe what we need to do is need to give your book to all these people.
And I'm sure they'll read it, right?
Oh, yeah, they'll read it. They'll read it, and they'll apply it.
Right.
Because it's so simple.
There we go.
It is simple, though. So here's the thing.
But it takes time.
There you go.
That's the problem.
It takes time in a culture.
And vulnerability. These are things that no one's willing to give.
No.
Most people. I shouldn't say
Most
no
people
one.
know. Yeah, you're right. Most people are unwilling to do that because it. And as we're talking about that, it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where it's easy to do, but also extremely hard to do, because it requires for said leader to change a set of behaviors that they're in some ways used to.
Yes.
At a subconscious level, even like as a parent.
And maybe they've been successful to a certain degree with those behaviors.
Correct.
And maybe they think they're the best. I mean, that's often the case with many CEOs. They think, I make the best decisions because the whole system's set up so that they will be the best, frankly.
Mm-hmm. So if the system is broken, then...
Right.
So if you're trying to implement your process into a system that's already broken, where, let's just say, it's all about the CEO and that CEO getting all the credit and recognition, and they call you up and they're like, hey, Matt.
They or the CEO calls me up?
The HR department.
Right. See, that's not going to work. That's a no.
So it has to come from the leader. It's got to come
from the very top. Otherwise, no.
The leader has to want it.
Correct.
Otherwise, it won't.
Because the leader sets the whole tone for culture in an organization. As much as people can make impact, if you're not the leader, you can still make impact, but you're working within a structure that is set. So you might make improvement in certain areas, but then the leader is rude, or the leader expects things, doesn't give advance notice, and comes and shows up and micromanages. What are you going to do about that?
That's interesting. At what point do you believe that certain people have too much authority? So here, I'm just thinking about this idea of Joe Rogan. Yeah. He signed this big, massive deal with Spotify. I don't know. 100 million, 200 million. I don't know really exactly the amount. Yeah. No one does. But recently, the staff at Spotify is unhappy with Joe Rogan. They don't like some of the content, some of the interviews. And so they have basically made it known to the CEO that they want Joe Rogan censored. And the CEO is refusing.
Right.
And now the employees are considering, I guess, some kind of protest. I'm not exactly what they're going to do. They're going to walk out or whatever it might be. So let's say you're that CEO at that point. How do you handle this?
Probably, I don't know that CEO, but that CEO it might just be about the money at that point. So it's about thinking risk management. Are these employees actually going to cause a significant enough problem? Because I assume this show is making lots of money.
Yes, it is. It's the number one podcast in the world.
Right.
And so Spotify signed Joe Rogan because they want to get into the,
of course,
into the podcast.
Yeah. So it's about money, of course. And is the CEO, is integrity going to win over profit? I don't know the CEO. I don't know what the thought process is going to be.
But the question I'm trying to ask is, at what point does the CEO have the veto power, in the sense of he's made the decision, obviously, and Spotify's made the decision to bring on Joe Rogan because they believe it's good for business.
Yes.
But in the culture that we live in, which is more of a cancel culture, where if you disagree with somebody, you silence them. So these employees, naturally, they're not for free speech per se.
Yes.
They don't necessarily agree with some of the positions that Joe Rogan has taken.
Yes.
They call him transphobic and all these things. But he's the reason he's the most successful podcaster in the world is because he's open to everything.
Yes.
And he will bring in any thought leader and he'll have great conversation.
Yes.
He's brilliant at that.
Yes.
And hence why so many people follow him.
Yes.
So they know what they signed for when they brought him in. And I'm sure in the agreements, Joe Rogan probably said, hey, you can't censor me.
Right. I'm going to do my own thing.
So I guess the question I'm asking you is, first of all, where did the CEO fail so that this wouldn't happen? Because I know talking about a situation or circumstance that you don't know anything about.
Yeah, totally. But I can just say broadly, did the CEO involve people in the decision?
Okay, that's what I'm getting to.
And oftentimes that's not the case, so there's no buy-in.
Okay, gotcha.
And that is something that I believe in a company, every person should have the authority to weigh in on decisions to a certain degree. That doesn't mean that every employee is going to be able to, you're not voting on whether or not to sign this guy. But was there enough buy-in of the senior team? Like, was this discussed, or was it just, no, we're doing this thing? Because buy-in makes a huge difference. And even just the feeling of control of just, I didn't even know about this thing. It just caught me out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, I totally disagree with everything that's happening. It's a different feeling versus, let's have a discussion about it. I'm open to all of your thoughts. Some people disagree, some agree, more agree, and we're feeling like this is the right decision for the company. When people have that chance to voice what's on their mind, it makes all the difference. Oftentimes people's voices are silenced.
Yes.
So then you see a revolt of sorts because you can't just silence my voice. That doesn't work.
They didn't sign up for
the authority to even speak up is often missing.
So that's where, because in the modern day, organizational structures, it's a kind of a hierarchy, top down.
For sure.
So these CEOs get together, and often they're making these decisions because they're like, hey, this is going to grow our business.
For sure.
I don't necessarily think I don't know how many employees Spotify has, but I'm sure they didn't do town hall meetings and try to figure out
probably not
at some point, because also timing is important. They don't have an infinite amount of time. They have to make decisions.
Sure.
And so these guys are paid to make those decisions. And so I guess part of the question that I'm asking is it's about roles, in the sense of that they have authority to some extent, these employees.
Yes.
But these CEOs or the senior level leadership, they also have responsibilities, and their responsibility is to make decisions, to grow the business, to grow the company.
But I would try and limit that as much as possible. Yes, the CEO is going to make certain decisions, but I would try and hand off as many as possible so there might be a reason why this particular decision was only made by the CEO. Could be confidentiality. There could be a lot of reasons why, but I would just try and hand off as much else that other people can own and really have responsibility for. So I don't like the thought that the CEO is the one that's paid to make all the decisions.
Okay.
I think the CEO is paid to ensure the best decisions
is made.
Yes. Which I think means really working with a team some of which will make a lot better decisions for certain areas than the CEO. So can the CEO work to get the best decisions across the company? That to me is the role of a CEO.
This is really powerful, because I'm as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about culture, because you talked about culture and culture matters. And maybe like Joe Rogan obviously comes with a certain culture. He's his own entity.
For sure.
He has his own spin on what he does. So he's got his own culture. and then there's Spotify culture.
For sure.
And so there's obviously these two cultures don't mesh at all.
And I don't even know if they have to, but
Well, I
obviously
guess-
the employees feel they do.
Well, that's the question I'm asking you, though. It's at some point, like, is it always about culture? Because I'm Spotify's thinking through the lens of we're getting into the podcasting world, and he's the number one podcaster in the world, and so let's put him in. And of course, stock market, their stock went up, and all this stuff happened at the beginning because it's a big signing for them.
Yes.
But at the same time, it wasn't a cultural fit. Definitely, we're starting to see that,
Right.
obviously. So when you make decisions,
But is the CEO silent to the team as they're kind of grumbling and upset about this, or let's chat about this?
Yeah.
In an open environment. Okay, we don't like some of the things he's saying on this front. Can we have a conversation about it? But versus, it could be the CEO's just silent on it, which again, that has a certain feeling of you're not addressing what's actually bothering me, which doesn't mean that needs to go away, but let's just have a conversation. But I don't know.
No,
I don't. Scenario. I just know very often in companies, decision gets made at the top. There's no openness to have a conversation about it, and then people are upset. And I don't like that
so
scenario.
ultimately, it falls on the leader. What you're
sure.
stating is that
sure.
when things like this happen,
Yes, and then you're realizing how little power you have.
yes,
That's what happens.
because now he's in a reactive mode. He's got to figure things. He's got to choose first
Yes.
of all. He's got to choose his employees or Joe Rogan, and it gets complicated. So what you're saying is that if you implement your methodology at the front end,
For sure.
you then
So yeah, now we have a conversation at the front end if things get missed, and now we have a conversation on the back end because people are upset. Let's chat about it. It's all about context too. Sharing here's why this decision was made. I understand he could be controversial in these areas. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation across the. I don't know if that's been done. It's just oftentimes those conversations are not had in companies.
It's funny because if you could just simply give the person the why,
For sure.
the bigger picture.
For sure. That's what people want.
Because even with this pandemic, if people can just, at the outset, I think this is the failure again. It's that
For sure.
people were confused from the beginning because they were getting mixed messages. There was a failure to leadership.
For sure.
And so now we're at a point where everybody's questioning the whole thing anyways. And so then you find these leaders in a reactive mode, and then when things don't work, they start to control it.
For
and
sure.
they just start to legislate it.
For sure.
And then it just, this dance.
Yes.
And then the people feel control, so they rebel more.
Yes. Yeah.
And on we go. And
Yeah.
it's madness.
But yeah, I agree from the beginning. There was not enough communication of why this matters, why doing this matters. That was just too absent from the work. For me, it felt like we all of a sudden jumped to, like you're saying, legislating things, and all of a sudden these controlling actions taking place, which they're not controlling actions if you're explaining the why. Now I'm bought in and I understand. Okay, this makes sense. It's just a different feeling.
So this is a good question to ask, because this is a crisis, and often we find ourselves as a parent or as an employer, we have a crisis that we didn't plan for.
But now you're tying into the short-term, long-term thing
Yes.
again, because there's a reactive need to address something in that second.
Yes.
So a crisis is that where all of a sudden, and in a crisis, that's oftentimes where control is the most tempting. That it's just going to happen.
Mm-hmm. But that's when you actually have to set context, because you've got to play the long game.
For sure.
Because otherwise, it's just going to be
Correct.
going to get worse.
Correct. And if the pandemic was just 2 weeks, back in the day, that's what people thought. We'll just do it for a couple of weeks. Then maybe control was more okay for that 2 week period of time. But as it goes on, it's like there was never any kind of like, let's circle back and really try and communicate and understand this thing. But that's what happens. Pandemic and crisis, urgency with the kids. If a car is driving and the kid's close to the car, you're going to yell and say, get out of the way, which is a fine time to use control. But if there's a crisis all the time, or if there's a crisis like the pandemic that's now going on for a long time, that's too extended a period of a feeling of control in a sense. That just needs to be addressed with the why.
The why. And that's hard, because in control, I think that's well said. If control is in these little tiny moments.
Tiny moments, not that frequent. Get a cycle back afterwards. Let's chat about it. Here's why I yelled at you when you were going on the road with the car coming. Sorry about that. But listen, the car was coming. Let's chat again about the context. When we're coming close to the road, let's cycle back to the context.
But if you're in a permanent state of crisis, which we are in this pandemic,
correct.
And people feel,
and companies operate that way too. I mean, that's very common. A permanent state of reactivity at the very least.
And so then they just can't get out of that cycle.
Can't.
They're just spinning.
Correct.
Yeah, that's really challenging. Because I'm just thinking about this right now, because even with the pandemic, things have been extended to the point where now people are, and governments are not really good at giving up control. That's the problem. Is that
people aren't,
and no one is.
Once you get control,
do you want more of it?
Yes.
You just want more,
yes.
because there is an addictive side to that too.
For sure.
It feels good, and so right now governments have a hard time because they're legislating because of crisis, and
for sure.
They're introducing all these measures and laws that are taking more and more of our civil liberties and civil rights,
which never would have happened before the crisis, but now it's a lot easier to do those types of things. So yeah, control is, again, it's appealing.
It's very appealing. So do you think it's possible for somebody who has consolidated tons and tons of power over the years, and power, whether it's government, CEOs and stuff like that, how quickly does it take for them to start to divest?
Good word.
It's like if you.
But are they going to? Are they ever going to choose to? Why would they?
What would they? So they would have to have some type of an external event.
External event, some sort of awakening. I don't know. But I don't think it's that likely with a lot of people. You get that kind of power and feeds into human nature, and that's what happens.
So absolute power corrupts. So the key is to not give people absolute power.
I would suggest against it. If you're asking me. I don't think anyone's going to take that.
So what would you say to that individual who is in an environment where, whether it's at work, where they feel absolutely controlled? And what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If it's at work, I would say, how much is it bothering you? Can you still make an impact in your sphere of influence? Can you still get some enjoyment out of what you're doing? But if not, if you're just being completely controlled, the only way that you can act in an empowered way at that point is to leave, because that's the only decision left that you can actually make. If it's a really bad controlling environment. But like I said, maybe you can find some enjoyment. Maybe your area, as you've carved out, you can make a real impact. And I say that's great. Life is about, we've been talking about the government, the pandemic. Life is about, despite certain things you agree with, disagree with, working in that scenario in the context of that, and trying to carve out something where you can make some decisions, have some autonomy, and enjoy whatever area you might be in.
Wow, this is good stuff. This has been really powerful. I'd like to end by asking you some personal questions.
Okay.
How long you've been white? Just kidding.
Wow. It's been a while.
That came to mind.
Did you ask everyone that question?
I ask everybody because, when I first came to North America, which is a while ago, obviously, came by way of Italy and then to Canada. So
yes,
the first time that I saw snow, it was very horrifying. And I
it's
thought,
still horrifying to me.
Yeah, so it was shocking. It wasn't that I saw white people or whatever, but it was the fact that I saw snow.
Yes.
And that was scary. So I
get it.
Yeah, but let's get serious here. You've been able to transition from owning a company to not knowing really. You went through this kind of a limbo state where you're trying to figure.
I don't know what
out.
to call it. Yeah.
And now you're back. Well, you're working for the company that bought your company.
Yes.
And in addition to that, you're doing some consulting,
yes,
coaching work, and just help people who are on this journey of transition. Maybe they're feeling this sense of like they have a message, they have something, they've been in it for a period of time. what would you tell that person that is trying to figure out, like, should I not? They're in that, state of like trying to figure it out.
I don't feel like I'm the expert on that topic at all.
No, not
I really
at all.
don't. I really don't. I have moments where I think, okay, I've got this message, I really want to get it out, but then I have other moments where I think, like, I have 3 kids, we're homeschooling. I think that's just where I need to invest my time. So I go back and forth between, I've got to get this thing out, versus I want to focus on the area that, I have influence right now, that I want to be investing in my family. I'm back and forth. That's not going to help anyone. I don't know. I'm still in tension about what's the right time, how much to invest in really trying to get the message out there. There's some tension, I guess.
Would you say that's just the natural, it's a natural state to be in, because you're here where, you've operated a business for a very long time, and then you exited that out, and now you're trying to kind of, reimagine your life, and so you're going through the state of like, okay,
Sure.
you've written a book, and
Yes.
you delve in this one, you kind of are trying to figure it out. You don't
Yes.
necessarily see completely everything. So is the doubt, the questioning, just a natural part of this?
Probably, but I think for me, the combination of selling my business, I don't feel in a rush per se. I've been a little bit.
You don't have enough of an impetus. You don't have to eat tomorrow.
Yeah, but I've also been turned off of just the rushed life, and I there's a chapter in the book about that as a leader, not making sure you have margin, not being too busy. But I sometimes I see people that are working really, really long hours, and I just think, why? That's just the stage that I'm at right now, and I've done that in the past.
Yeah.
So I've been in that life. I'm just not there at the moment. So I'm not in a huge rush, I guess, and I'm okay with that. But I understand that I have some friends that will say to me, "Oh, what's the big thing you're doing next?" I'm not in a rush for that.
Yeah,
and
and you're happy.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You're content and you're
For sure.
fulfilled.
For sure.
And I think, you had this great chapter in your life, and you're young, so you do have time. And I think often I get to that place where I think, like, I'm in a hurry, and I often think to myself, where am I trying to get to?
For sure.
And why am I rushing? Because then in the midst of that, I miss the things that are in front of me.
Yeah.
Like I recently wrote a post on LinkedIn. You probably read it because you're my biggest fan.
I don't know if I did.
I know you didn't. See, just the fact that
I would have liked it if I read it.
So it's okay. It's okay.
I like everything that I read of yours.
Yeah, you do. But it is all about that when I burnt out, I was in this, and I was doing it for God. So, that's even a bigger reason.
Yes.
Because, and often in the midst of trying to pursue this bigger call, this bigger purpose, and all that stuff, you miss the things that are in front of you. And for me, it was my kids.
Yes.
and my wife.
For sure.
And I'd forgotten that was my primary call first.
Yes.
And so in doing that, there's a tremendous amount of pain that you experience. And so I've watched you, and I've always been fascinated. Even, when we got together, you always seem to have a lot of time available. Like, it's amazing actually how you, even when you were running your company, you just had this ability to carve out,
which wasn't the case before. It's just that's the transition for me. And once you transition out of that, all of a sudden people are making good decisions around you, and you're not living the stressful, reactive life. It's hard to go back to that. It seems very foreign. But that's what's common in the world. That's how most people live.
And it's
I
addictive.
understand that, for sure.
It's very addictive.
For sure.
You get addicted to it. You that's your kind of reason for living.
Yes.
You get up every
Yes.
morning to get ahead of that.
For sure.
That rush that you get from having to be in charge of everything.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
running around. So, and I guess for people that are in that state right now, what would you tell them?
I would say to think about what actually really matters to you. What's the impact you want to make? What really matters? and then what's getting in the way of that. And for me, it just comes down to saying no to some things. One skill that I have is saying no, and to things that are sort of outside the lane of where I want to be heading. And I think people are just very often either intentionally or unintentionally allow things to creep in, that you become so busy with things that are taking you in a lane that's not even going towards the impact you want to make. So just watching it, like, what is the impact, and let's get rid of some things so I can actually head towards that.
That's really good. And I'm the kind of guy who ends up in other people's, boats. And I've done that for many years.
Yes.
and got stuck in it's these 5-year cycles, I call them, because that's what they were. Like every
Yes.
5 years, like I get in, and then at 5 years, I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Because I'm pushing something that is not necessarily my calling or
Yes.
the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And so my wife and I were just having that conversation over the weekend. We were talking about how much focus it requires to not let others in.
For sure.
It's so being able to say no at the front end is really hard.
Yes.
Because you're hurting someone's feeling, whatever. But in the long run, you're like, thank God, because you don't have
Absolutely.
to have that. You don't have to be in a situation where you're like regretting it.
But if you don't pay attention to it, it'll just happen. Just naturally, it will happen that you'll get sucked into things, and next thing you know, you're not at all heading the direction you want to be, because it just happened.
It just happened. And often that's what happens to people. Just
sure.
life just happens.
For
They
sure.
say that often. It's like, well, just happened. How'd
Yeah.
you get here? Well, it just
Yeah.
happened. But it's a series of little decisions that we make every day.
For sure.
And you've become really good at controlling your calendar. Like
Yeah, I'm pretty annoying about that. Like
Yeah.
sometimes in the company I'm at, people will just put meetings on your calendar, and it'll just say chat or something like that in the subject. I'm like,
I don't want to
no,
chat.
that's not going to happen. Sorry, what's the purpose? I'm fine. I'm fine chatting with someone. Let's be very honest.
No.
But I don't want this operational conversation that maybe it's actually for someone else. Maybe someone else should be in the mix, but don't just put something on my calendar and you just lose. I see people that lose 10 hours a day in meetings, and that's their day.
No.
It depends on the impact you want to make, but what I'm saying is be intentional about it.
Let's end with this. How have you been able to, like, I've watched you really live out your faith and your spirituality in the context of your work, and of course in your life and family and so forth, so on. And how, like, where are you right now in regards to how you're, I know it's a
You have
big
hours.
it's in hours,
we've got
yes.
like 5 minutes and I have to leave, Joe.
Yeah, well, give it to me in 2 minutes. Come on. Okay, but let's just say in the context of faith and work and all that stuff, how do you incorporate those two things right now? How do they work for you?
I think for me, this is maybe tying to the very beginning of our conversation,
Yeah.
something I said about you being perceptive of people. I'm seeing a real need in the workplace to actually just care about people. So that ties into faith in a sense, because I actually want to legitimately care more about impacting people and being there for people, speaking into their life a lot more than the business conversation or the operation conversation. So I tend to gravitate more towards how's it really going? Anything bothering you? What's on your mind? I tend to gravitate to that zone right now, and that I think is where the impact comes in. That I do believe that will in the end result in business impact, but for me, it's concentrating on the person first, and then I think good things happen from there.
Yeah. That's a
that's
really good answer.
small
No, that's
at all.
brilliant. I love the way you've distilled it. I think it's a great way to finish too, because in the end, it's about people. It's about connection, and I even saw a stat recently. I can't remember where I saw it, but they said that 38% of employees would leave their current position if they could be in an environment where they feel validated and
Absolutely.
heard. And
Absolutely.
so I think people.
So you're just asking people to do things all day, but yet no one actually knows the person. I mean, It's not a great feeling.
No, I think it's a wonderful way to approach it. And thank you for this conversation. You're incredibly brilliant. And guys, if you want to pick up Matt Blakely's book, Empowered Then Lead, you can get it on his website. I think it's called empoweredthenlead.com.
Yeah, that's
cool.
it.
You can find him. And if you want to talk to him, well, you're going to have to. You probably won't be able to talk to him because he's got this.
Yeah, I'm just going to say no.
He's just going to say no. So don't even bother talking to him. Just
skip that step.
Don't even talk. Call me. I'll talk to anybody.
Awesome.
But thank you so much. You've been incredible. Peace out.